Good evening. It's Marlon Smith with my colleague Tony Jackson, and welcome to the Real Money Coach. Tonight is very, very important. So get your notepad, get your pen. We're going to be talking about credit and collections. Know your rights. Our special guest is phenomenal. Attorney Tiffany Hill is here with us, and she's going to be sharing some insights and what your rights are, as well as how you can deal when people are, not fairly treating you. And so I'm very excited because, again, one of the things that we do with the Real Money Coach is we talk about solutions, strategies, information, as well as inspiration. And I'm very excited because last week's program was phenomenal. So I just want to go ahead. Let's get into it. Let's bring on my colleague, Tony Jackson, onto the screen so we can just talk about, man, did you have fun last week, Tony?
Hey, Marlon, you know I had a ball last week.
Man,
I had a great time. I got a lot of comments
smile.
about it. It's like, man, you sitting there like the proud papa last week. And I'm like,
Right.
hey, what do you expect?
Exactly.
That's my baby girl. That's my
Your
baby girl, man.
Right? Yeah, man. That was phenomenal,
very,
man.
very exciting. And you know what's interesting, Marlon, is that, we've been teaching these classes, churches and different groups and all that. And I learned a lot last week. And so,
Wow.
like, Adrian, can you do that for me? Can you, take care of a couple of things for your pops, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, very exciting time just to see her launch what she's doing. And there's so many people, man, that need to know what their rights are. And so that's why I'm excited tonight that Tiffany's going to be with us talking about what your rights are in terms of, Fair Credit Reporting Act and all the things that she does. And so just very excited. And I see we have some of our people checking in, Marlon.
Already
here, and Dr. Harris is here. And so we got our crew coming in.
That's right. And Tony, I think that's really so important because a lot of times we just don't know any better, right? And and sometimes I'm so excited to have attorney Tiffany here because one of the things that she'll be sharing is information, right? Very important information, especially as we've talked about before, as far as disease is not always what you're eating, it's what's eating you, right? And so I think tonight is going to be very important, for all of our viewers. And I want to encourage you to go ahead. You can share this, and do a watch party, so that more of your family and friends are, informed. And, it's just very important. So, people are still rolling. Melissa's
here. Richard's here. Had a great conversation with him earlier today. He's doing amazing things with his business. And so, and this is what I did, Marlon. I said, well, I gotta get kind of prepared for Tiffany. So, I went out there and did a little research, and I got all these pages of the Fair Reporting Credit Act. I'm like, what is this?
Wow.
And what's interesting is I was looking at it, and some of the rights that we have under the Fair Reporting Credit Act. Adrian talked about some of the things last week, and it's just interesting. And just to get to know, hey, Tommy from Boston, he's with us. So just getting to know Brad is with us tonight. So, and these guys are expecting a great show, man. So we got to bring it because, I think Adrian brought it last week. And that's why we have these really wonderful guests come on, because they help us bring it. They help us bring great education, great motivation. And so we want people to be both informed and inspired to go out and make a change.
Sure.
Again, the Real Money Coach is for information that is relevant, educational, actionable. You can take action with it. That's a real word, actionable, and also life-changing. And so we're just excited to continue this process and this series. Every Thursday night, we're right here.
So, Tony, let me ask you, man, have you ever had a situation where, somebody was harassing you? Has that ever... Or do you know when a family member, this is real talk. So, let's,
And I have, Marlon, the people calling about, and just calling you all times of night and stuff. And some of it, I think, has been violations. What do you do about it? I don't know. And then, when you find out, I was getting calls, and I thought really they were prank calls. I mean, honestly, I thought it was prank calls. I thought it was like a robocall.
Okay.
And, you know, and I think there's a lot of stuff going on out there. We find a lot with seniors,
Yeah.
and, you know, we think, you know, send us a check, you know, we need your checking account number,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And I thought that's really what it was. And so I was just kind of ignoring it. I might even block the call.
Mhm.
And then I got a collection letter, right? And I was like, oh man, this is just fraudulent stuff. This is not cool.
Wow.
And then when I got my copy of my free credit report, I saw it on there.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, wow, you know. And so I actually did write a letter and disputed that particular item. Actually, I didn't do it quite the way you're supposed to, but and I said, hey, listen, I didn't live at this place. I mean, this is not my bill. This is not my consumer bill. I mean,
Wow.
I wasn't living there. And they, I mean, immediately they took it off of my credit report. But initially, I thought it was just, you know, just trying to get some money. I thought it was, you know, one of those type of things.
Sure.
Then when I got the letter, it's like, you know, they're just trying to get me to send some money for
Okay.
something that really doesn't belong. But then it actually was on my credit report.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so,
So, you know, thank you for being transparent, Tony. And for our viewers, you know, I encourage you, you know, just type in the chat box. Do you know a family member or a friend that has been, let's just say, falsely accused of something or has been harassed? Would love to see what your comments are, you know, because again, you know, the Real Money Coach, we're here to be very relevant, you know, as far as, you know, the information we share. So, you know, Tony shared his story. You know, please type in the chat box if you've ever had an experience, you personally, or if you know of a family member or a friend, you know, that's been, you know, harassed, if you would, or, you know, and because again, one of the things that we're striving to do is, I believe that when you take off the mask and you're just very transparent and you can say, you know, yes, you know, I've had this situation, it's freeing from the standpoint that you're no longer kind of in like a secret,
yeah,
right?
it doesn't,
And
you're not bound by it anymore.
yes,
You're
yes,
not bound by it
exactly.
anymore.
Yeah,
And
you
so,
know,
and you know, Marlon, as you were talking, I was thinking a lot about, and this kind of leads into just a promo for next week, even um, predatory lending, you know, that we see in our communities, particularly
mm,
communities of color, particularly communities of lower economic status.
wow.
And you see, what do you see? You see the check cashing places.
Okay.
You see payday loans. You see pawn shops. You see those type of things,
Mm,
and that's really what we see on the surface. It's the things that's happening behind there in terms of there's this concept called redlining that was very prevalent in our country, and it was used in lending. It was used in insurance, and they literally would take a red line and they would draw it around certain areas
wow.
of a city. Charlotte had it as well as other cities, Detroit, all over the country. And if you lived within the red line, you actually paid more for your insurance. You
Wow.
actually paid more in interest rates
Hmm.
for the banking. And that's why a lot of the banks now have the Community Reinvestment Act back in the 70s that was passed, where they were penalized for some
Mm,
of their practices. And so
okay.
now they have the Community Reinvestment Act. Well, now they got to put money back in there. And I don't know, maybe at the end, if we have some time, Tiffany could even talk to us a little bit about the opportunity zones. I know she knows a lot about that.
Yes.
We might have some viewers that would like to know more about those type of things too. So if time permits, maybe
All
we'll
right.
get into a little bit of that.
That sounds good. And also, before we do bring Tiffany on, I see Evelyn said the enemy works to isolate us from others, especially those who have information, the information we need. And so, you know,
Yeah.
that's real powerful. And so thank you, Evelyn. And that's where, again, there's power in sharing, right? There's power in taking off the mask and saying, hey, because we've all, you know, said, if I only knew back then what I know now, right?
Right.
And that to me is what we're doing. We're striving to, you don't have to feel, I don't know, what would you say, Tony, like almost like the pain of shame, right?
Yeah.
I mean, right? I mean, come on, man, money. I mean, you know, a lot of us have, you know, made some mistakes, right? And so, you know, I think that that's one of the things that we're striving to do is just, you know, let's put it on the table, right? I mean, none of us have done everything perfect. And
I just use the term, Marlon, none of us is Jesus Jr., right? We've all
right,
made some mistakes. We've all
sure,
done some things wrong. And if we could go back in time to redo some of those things, we would. Just even what we're doing on Saturday, right? What we're
yeah,
doing with Nations For, what we're doing to bring financial education into into churches and the workplace. We never were taught those things growing up,
right,
you
right,
know, and we maybe caught bits and lessons and stuff, and we watched. You can watch a good example, you can watch a bad example, and
right.
so there's a lot of different things that happen, and so I'm so I guess proud is a word I would say that we are bringing that information to people, and that people are telling us that they're using it,
Yes,
because that's the most important thing, is that we use the information. And
right,
no one wants to spend their time, talent, and treasure to bring this to you and it not be used. So we
exactly,
want it to be life changing. We want people to get we want their credit score to go up. We want
right,
their debt to income to go down. We want them to save more. We want them to invest more. We want them to retire wealthy. We want all that for everybody. And so this is just our way of getting that information out. And we just pray that it's a blessing for everyone who gets it.
yeah. Well, look, I've got my notepad and my pen. I am ready. So, I'll let you go ahead and do the honors, brother, of introducing our special guest.
All right. Well, actually, Marlon, I should have had you doing this introduction, because you actually introduced me to Tiffany.
Right.
But tonight, folks, we have Tiffany Hill. She is an employment and consumer law attorney, a member of the Louisiana, Ohio, and Oklahoma bars. She's owner of TH Legal Consulting. Tiffany's law practice includes federal court litigation, policy development, corporate compliance, and higher education law. Interesting, higher education law. We might have to ask some questions about that. She's actively involved in the community, uh, doing community service. She's a member of several national organizations, including Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, the Links Incorporated. Tiffany is also an author, filmmaker who utilizes her legal experience to help bring continued awareness to domestic violence as well. And so, with that, folks, I want to introduce and bring on camera with us Miss Tiffany Hill.
Hi, thank you so much for that awesome introduction. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be a part of your show tonight.
Well, thank you. I know this is just a snippet of what you really do. Of course, we've had several meetings over the last year or so, got the chance to know you. You were actually here in Charlotte not too long ago, and
I hope
my
you can
wife and my
travel
son.
again soon so I can start back traveling and seeing all my friends again.
There you go. There you go. I think we actually were there. We were seeing Les Brown,
That's
and
correct.
and that was an awesome experience. And so, we're really happy to have you tonight, and we're really looking to learn from you and share with us some things that we need to know, because knowledge is power. The use of that knowledge is where the power really comes in. And so, we're not going to really. I'm just going to let you loose, share with us, and then what we want to do is really encourage everyone who's watching. If you have questions, I kind of gave you a little bit of her background, what she's doing. If you have some questions, we want you to post that in there. After she's done a little presentation here for about the next 15-20 minutes, then we're going to come back and we're going to answer some of your questions. And so, Tiffany, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Again, I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be on. Anytime I can talk to you and Marlon, I think I always learn a lot. So it was funny to hear Marlon say he has his notepad. Because that's the way I feel when I listen to you guys. When I have the opportunity to pop in on your lives, I feel like I always learn a lot of information that I can actually put into use. And that's really important. It's not just information, but it's practical information that I can put into use. So I feel the same way about you guys. And I also want to take the time to thank everyone who's watching and listening, because I think it's so important that we have these conversations. That's why I was really excited about being a guest and being a part of the show, because that's actually what I encourage my clients to do, is that we have these conversations about money, that we, as Marlon said, remove the mask and we're comfortable having the conversations, because that's where we can make change that impacts us in the long run, us and our families. As I'm a mother of 3 young boys, and the things that I learn, I want them to be able to take and expound upon to make their lives better as well. So again, thank you all. These conversations are very important. And I grew up in a very small town in North Louisiana called Spearsville. So I'm originally from Spearsville, Louisiana, and my parents talked to us a lot about money, but it was more so don't get in debt and don't get credit cards. But we didn't really get into the why of that. And so I think with my kids, it's important for me to share with them why that's important, how much this impacts you financially, how much it impacts you in employment choices and options down the road. So there are so many things that these wealth principles that you guys are teaching, how they impact us in such a major way. And I really am passionate about it within our African American communities, because I see firsthand, as an attorney doing consumer law litigation, how these companies profit off of our lack of information and our lack of knowledge. And they're actually making billions of dollars off of our lack of knowledge. And so that's what I want to see change. And Tony, I heard you say earlier that you got a letter and you think it was a violation, but you really didn't know what to do about it. And so that's really how I describe what I do to people. I'm a consumer law advocate. So I advocate for consumers. So when you get that letter and you don't know what to do, or you feel that something isn't right about it, but you're not quite sure legally have they violated any law, that's where I come into play. And that's how I'm able to help, or people like me, consumer law litigation attorneys, are able to help you take that next step beyond credit repair and disputing to, okay, now we're ready to get into court and litigate on these matters. So I watched last week's live that Adrienne did. She was phenomenal. And I encourage all of your viewers to go back and watch it, because it was really great, a great program. And she discussed some key things that if I hadn't watched that, I probably would have brought up in my own presentation. So I'm glad that I was able to go back and watch it. But she talked a lot about the importance of documentation, sending things via certified mail. Those are things that you can do early on that helps you when you get to the point of hiring legal counsel, because now we have the proper documentation to make your case in court. She also talked about the timeliness of creditors having 30 days to respond to you on your complaint, and you making sure that you're timely in your follow-up with that. And it is, I will say, I'll stop and say for our listeners, it's a tedious process. So I think some people sometimes get intimidated because it's such a tedious process and it's time consuming, but it is something that's very important that you keep up with all those letters, all those disputes, what you receive back. You have to monitor that so that you can have your legal action later if there are violations of the law. And then the last thing that she talked about that I just wanted to review and highlight was getting copies of your consumer reports, or they're more popularly known as credit reports, getting copies of those regularly and knowing what's in your reports. That is so key. And that's one of the things that we can all do. Get copies of those reports, know what's on your report at all times, and making sure that information is accurate. And so luckily now there's a lot more information that's more accessible now than ever. And so we have the resources to where we can even Google these things. You can Google right now a complaint. How do you make a complaint? And, have that information to write to the creditors and start your own complaint process. So tonight, what I wanted to cover, I don't know if you guys want me to stop throughout for questions, I'm happy to do that as well. But I'm just going to talk about two of the major laws that we see from a legal framework where there are violations. And those two are the FCRA and the FDCPA. And so, as you know, every profession has these acronyms. And the first one is the FCRA, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And then the second one is the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. So I'm going to just go over very briefly and try to highlight some of the key components of those. And we'll start with the FCRA, which again is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This act deals with the accuracy, fairness, and privacy of information in the files of consumer reporting agencies. So the big three consumer reporting agencies, as we know, are Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. But there are other reporting agencies that you might not be aware of, like they're agencies that compile information about rental history, check writing history. So all of those agencies or organizations will fall up under the FCRA. And you, under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, I see it scrolling on the screen. Thank you for that. Again, consumers have a right to have accurate information in your consumer file, your consumer report, or your credit report. What you would want to do when you get those reports is review them for accuracy. And so when you're disputing, there are key words that you want to include in your report. You want to let them know when you dispute if you see any information that is inaccurate or incomplete. Those are key points legally that trigger certain legal rights that we'll talk about later. So you always want to make sure that you're letting them know or putting them on notice if information is inaccurate or incomplete. A few key things that the FCRA covers: you have to be told if the information in your report has been used against you. So if you receive some kind of negative, and it might have happened before where you applied for credit and you were denied that credit, then you have to get information as to why it was denied. And most times they also include a copy of your consumer report with that notice. You have a right to know what's in your file. So we talked about that, and you guys also talked about that last week, where you are able to get a free copy of your report every year. So annually, you're able to get a free copy. Right now, because we're going through the coronavirus pandemic and all the things that are coming along with that, you're able to get your reporting more frequent. I think I know Tony mentioned that. I'll have to go back and look. I think you can get it once a month. It might be even more frequent than that for free. So we definitely want to take advantage of that and pull those reports. It will not be any penalty to you for pulling it, and you will have the opportunity to see what's in your report. Again, any information that is inaccurate or incomplete, you want to dispute that immediately. If it can't be verified, they have an obligation to delete that from your reports. Access to your file is limited, so only people can pull it if they have a permissible purpose. And so that's important, because if you see on your report where your credit has been pulled for a reason that and you didn't authorize that, then you have what we call a permissible purpose lawsuit, where you can file a lawsuit for someone pulling your credit report without your permission. I know you guys have talked a lot about opting out of pre-screen offers. You have a right to do that. The FCRA covers that as well. And then you also have a right to be notified if any financial institution plans to submit negative information to a consumer reporting agency. So if you owed a debt, if you owed a credit card debt, and they plan to turn it over to a collection agency, well, before that happens, you have to receive notice that that negative information or derogatory information is going to be reported against you. And there are many things that, of course, the FCRA covered. I know Tony joked about how many pages of it is. Several different sections. You know, I refer to them legally. We refer to the violations by the section number of the law. But if any one of those violations happens under any of those sections, you have a right to file a lawsuit. And you can sue in state court or federal court for violations of these provisions. And so I want to take a moment and just share how I got involved in consumer law litigation, because I've done a lot of different areas, practiced in a lot of different areas of the law. And I had a mutual friend here who he actually runs a credit reporting agency, a credit repair agency here in the Oklahoma City area. And so he reached out to me and he said, he's been working with his clients. They've gone through the dispute process, but then they would get to a point where there are violations, there's no resolution, and he wanted an attorney that could take the next step and file litigation in court. And so at that time, I was doing mostly employment law, and I still do some employment law. But I was doing mostly employment law at that time. And I was a little hesitant to stop and get into consumer law because I hadn't done that before. But I agreed to meet with some of his clients. And I met with his clients, and all of them looked like me. They were mostly African-American clients. And of course, I have a passion and affinity for the African-American community. And the feeling was really a feeling of hopelessness. Like, what do I do? They're not being responsive to me. Furnishers are not responding back to my complaints. They were just, some of them were just blowing them off and not even responding to the complaints that they were making. And so one of the obligations one of the sections of the FCRA deals with the responsibilities that furnishers have to report information to consumer reporting agencies. And so that provision reads that a person shall not furnish any information relating to a consumer to any consumer reporting agency if the person knows or has reasonable cause to believe that the information is inaccurate. So one of the first potential clients I met with, he had a mortgage loan that was being reported inaccurate. So the bank was the lender, which ended up being the defendant in the lawsuit, and they were reporting his balance completely wrong. The balance was much higher than what he actually owed on the bank loan. And so the actual legal or principle there was that the information, of course, was inaccurate, as we talked about earlier. It falls under the FCRA because the bank is what's called a furnisher of information. So they were furnishing this inaccurate information to the credit reporting agencies. And so from a legal standpoint, we're suing the bank for furnishing this inaccurate information to credit reporting agencies. We also, in lawsuits, you bring in the consumer reporting agencies as well. So we're suing the bank, which in this case was Navy Federal. And we also bring in Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. So now you have 4 defendants at a minimum. And you might wonder, well, why are you suing Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion? Well, you bring them in because my client in this instance had started the dispute process with the credit repair agency. He had been disputing for a year, sending them letters once a month, letting them know this information was inaccurate. They didn't do anything. They didn't respond at all to his complaints. That's the bank. So the credit reporting agencies, they had also been disputing with them during the entire year. Well, they were providing what are called reinvestigation reports back to the consumer, my client, indicating the information is valid. We've investigated this. The information is accurate. There's nothing more we can do. So for a year, my client had been going through this dispute process where monthly he was sending out dispute letters with no action, no resolution. So our legal claim was that there was not a proper reinvestigation done on these complaints. Also, another action that you have under the FCRA is that your reports have to be updated when you submit a dispute. So if you do a dispute letter to a furnisher on your credit report, when you get that reinvestigation report, even if it's not resolved, the report should be updated with a note saying that the consumer is disputing this trade line or this account. That did not appear on this particular client's credit report. So although he had been disputing for a year, there was no notation on the file that he was disputing. So for an attorney, where we're able to help then is to come in with number one, what's the violation? Where does it fall under the law? And then also, what are the damages? What damages do you have under the law? So this particular client, he found out about this because he was in the process of buying a home. So instantly, and in most cases, actually all of my cases, the damages are always going to be the delay or loss of a credit opportunity. Because if you have inaccurate information on in your credit profile, then you're definitely going to have loss of additional credit opportunities. Also, another damage that we have is that he was granted interest at a much higher interest rate because, of course, we know that your interest rate is affected by the items in your credit profile. There are also non-economic damages that you can obtain through the legal avenue, such as mental anguish, frustration, embarrassment, anxiety, sleeplessness. So, before we get ready to file a lawsuit, I tell my clients all the time, so how has this impacted you? How has it impacted your family? Those are things that are measurable in the form of damages when you get to litigation stage. Pulling a credit report and being denied a loan is embarrassing and are things that can impact you, as far as I said, like your anxiety, your sleeplessness. These are damages that you can actually take to court. Our end result in this client's particular case was he had a $40,000 loan on his credit report. The entire debt was removed pursuant to our litigation. And this was one of my first litigation cases in consumer law, and probably is why I'm still doing consumer law, because I remember calling that client and I was so hung up on the damages because I will admit, as an attorney, sometimes we are focused on the win and our win looks different, depending on the case and depending on the client. So for me in this particular case, the win for me was for my client to get a tremendous amount in damages because he had been disputing for a while. He lost the opportunity to purchase this home that he wanted while he was waiting on this case to be resolved. And so I felt like his damages should have been more than what he was given. And so I remember calling him after negotiating with opposing counsel, and I was like, I have some semi good news. They're agreeing to eliminate the debt completely. You'll get damages, but it's not what I feel you should get. And so I went through the whole process of what you do normally when you're talking to a client about settlement, because the client has to approve the settlement, no matter how much I like it. As an attorney, I don't have the authority to accept the settlement without my client's consent. And he got completely quiet on the phone. And I was like, hello, I'm thinking he's probably totally disappointed. And his words to me after that, he was literally in tears. And he said, this is a life changer. And I think at that moment, I realized that I was focused, on the legality and how much we should have been getting. And for him, it meant having that $40,000 debt erased from his credit report was going to change the fact that, he had kids in college. He was trying to start a new business. And we disputed more than just this one debt. So there were things that were removing off his credit and making his credit score higher. And he understood that that was really changing the dynamics of his life financially. And for me, that was one of those wow moments where I was like, wow, this area of the law really has the opportunity to impact people in such a major way, just off of little technicalities that if the consumer or the debt collector or furnisher of information doesn't follow one provision under this law, we can potentially remove an entire trade line, an entire debt from a consumer's credit profile. And that is major. And that's the power of these laws, the power of the FCRA and the power of the FDCPA. It really is to protect consumers from unfair collection practices and misleading or inaccurate information in their credit profile. Are you stopping me?
No, I'm not stopping you, but I just want to, what you just said was so rich. I just wanted to kind of talk about it a little bit. I don't want that to slip away.
No, I
Because
wasn't paying attention to the time. So when I saw you pop in, I said, I've probably gone over my
no,
time.
no, not at all. I want you to go back and finish. But one of the things that you were talking about was the impact that this had on his life. You know, you're talking about loss of credit opportunities, paying higher interest rates,
Right.
missing out on the mortgage, and all those types of things. The embarrassment.
Mm.
You talked about him wanting to start a business, and I think you even mentioned having kids in college, and he probably got to apply for a parent loan that he gets denied on, and all those types of things. I just thought it was so amazing as you shared that story because it really emphasized the importance of this whole credit piece.
Right.
Because it's not just a number, you know, it's not just 500, 600, 750, 800, whatever. It really has a tremendous impact on your life in terms of, you know, what keeps you up at night, you know,
Right.
what's the type of thing that keeps you up at night. And so I just thought that was so amazing. And what's interesting is I think, would you say this, and I'm assuming this, that one of the things that probably worked in your favor is because he had been doing it for a year before he got to you. It
Yeah.
wasn't like he came to you and all of a sudden, hey, I got this debt I want you to get rid of. He had documentation that he was using a credit repair facility that was probably sounds like they were doing it right with registered letters and all that kind of stuff. But he actually had someone that he was working with that got him to the point. And now when it came to you, now it's time to pull out the big gun.
Yes, and I think that was important. It was important that he had the documentation, that he had been making the effort. But I also, I'm hesitant to say that it has to be a year because there have been cases where we disputed for 3 months and there was no action and we took it to litigation. So that case, he had definitely done the right things. He had been patient, and it was just so heartwarming for me to see, you know, how impactful that was for him and for his family. And even to this day, like, he still refers people to me. And I just think it's, you know, that's, like I said, the case that helped me understand the importance of these laws and sharing this information with people like your audience and, you know, the people I come in contact with, just sharing this information and letting people know what their rights are under the law. So absolutely. And even if you're
Wow.
not using a credit reporting agency, if you're doing the disputes yourself, just making sure that you're keeping those records so that when if you get to a point where you need to utilize an attorney or another professional, then you have that documentation.
Wow, that's good. That's good. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were in
Oh,
the
yeah, you're
flow, but I just thought it was so significant because you know that's the thing that we talk a lot about that people don't want to talk about. What impact is the credit having? I mean, and we've even talked about, you know, your car insurance, right? And that's uh, uh, one of the factors in how much you pay for your insurance and all those types of things. So it's pretty major.
absolutely. Whether you have to pay, you know, even getting a cell phone in some instances, um, they're pulling your consumer reports for that. You know, it just impacts you in so many different ways. I have a client actually that I'm working with right now. She got an amazing job, and they flagged her for what they call a fitness concern, and it's over some items on her consumer report. And so she hired me because she needs some fast resolution. You know, she probably could dispute these things on her own, but her employer is giving her like 60 days to 30 to 60 days really to respond to them as to whether these items are accurate on her report, you know, because her job is a financial position where that matters. So it does impact us in a lot of different ways.
Well, that's a great point because most of the time we're thinking about, you know, I got to have good credit because I want to go out and get this, that, the other. You know, we're buying something, you know,
Right.
we're buying a house, buying a car, so it imposes problems there. But when you're talking about your job, I mean, and even in our industry, credit matters. You know, they're going to run your credit report. Now, you mentioned the three main credit bureaus. Are there other organizations or other processes that the Fair Credit Reporting Act have an impact on outside of the three main credit bureaus? Are there other things that comes into play?
The Fair Credit Reporting Act applies to furnishers of information. So that would be, although, like I said, the bank in this instance, in this particular case, also falls on the FCRA because they're a furnisher of information to those credit reporting agencies. So it's vast, it covers a lot. I've tried to summarize, here, but it definitely covers a lot. And like I shared with you guys earlier, if anyone is viewing this and has any specific questions or, want to know what area applies to them, definitely reach out because I'm happy to. It's probably something that the FCRA, you can Google it and find it online, right? But it's always helpful when there's someone who can just say, this section is what,
Right.
point you in the right direction in a shorter amount of time. And I do that all the time with my friends. Like if I had an insurance question, I would probably call you and Marlon before I went and search for the answer on my own.
Well, we appreciate that. We appreciate that. So one of the things that would be great too, I know that you have some notes and stuff like that. I mean, even if you have something that you could send to us, so if people email us at info@therealmoneycoach, maybe we could shoot them a PDF or something. I got this little thing I pulled off the internet. We could send them that. It's summary of your rights under Fair Credit Reporting Act. So if there's something like that you want to send us that we could send out, I mean, certainly that would be great. Now, you were going to get into the fair, what was it again? Got it. Fair Debt Collections Act.
Yes.
So I'm going to let you roll with that a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what that is all about.
Okay, great. This is a great chance to shift gears to the FDCPA, which is where we normally see the most violations, or where I normally see the most violations are under the FDCPA. So that's the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And this act protects the consumer from unfair and unethical debt collection practices. So it ensures fairness and full disclosure from the debt collectors, third-party debt collectors that are calling you or otherwise reaching out to you, whether it's written communication. And so what it does is it makes it illegal for those debt collectors to use abusive or unfair, deceptive collection practices when they're collecting debts. And so it's basically the guidebook, the rule book for what debt collectors must follow. And more often than not, they violate these laws all the time. So this is an easy area to get violations for debt collectors under the law. And so when clients call me, and sometimes, we talked about that embarrassment aspect, and I agree with Marlon as far as the transparency comment. We should be transparent, and I always try to make them feel comfortable and more relaxed when they call, because a lot of times they're like, I have a lot of things on my credit report. And I'm like, that's just more violations. Like, that's the way I look at it. The more things you have on your report is probably the likelihood that most of those debt collectors have violated some aspect of the FDCPA. So I'm going to talk about a few common violations that I see. And again, like I said, there are numerous, but some of the common ones that we see are continuous communication or ignoring requests to cease communication after written notice. So if you have a debt collector that is calling you at unreasonable hours, if you've given them written notice to stop communicating with you, it happens even with me all the time as an attorney. I will send out a letter to a debt collector asking for what's called debt validation. And I think you guys talked about this last week as well, but I'll just briefly say, when you get a letter from a debt collector, the first thing you want to do is ask them to validate the debt. And I tell my clients, I really don't care if you know that it's your debt. You still ask them to validate it. And I think Adrian last week had a tagline, I'm blanking on it right now, about if they can't prove it, remove it, or something like that, wasn't it, Tony? If you can't prove it, they must remove it.
That's exactly what it is. If they can't prove it, they must remove it.
I could not agree more. And like I said, I tell my clients, I don't care if you know it's your debt. You make them prove that it's your debt, because there are times, and I've seen many cases where they don't even have the proper documentation to validate the debt. So whether it's yours or not, now guess what? You don't have to pay on that debt if they can't validate it. And a lot of people, a lot of clients do not know that. And they end up making payments on debts that they really legally aren't even able to collect under because they're in violation of the FDCPA. Another common violation is that the amount of the debt is inaccurate, or they're making false representations about the status of the debt. So an example of that is a debt that's discharged in bankruptcy. And I also have a client that I'm working with currently on this, where the debt that is the debt collector is calling her on is discharged in bankruptcy, yet they're still calling her trying to collect. Now, imagine if she would have just paid the debt. She has no obligation to make a payment on a debt that was discharged in bankruptcy 3 years ago. So we're actually preparing right now a lawsuit against that debt collector for their unfair collection practice of trying to collect on this debt after notice that it's been discharged in bankruptcy. You'll also see debt collectors trying to include fees or charges that were not a part of the original loan agreement. They are unable to do that, and so that's also a violation. Threatening or harassing consumers over the debt, they are absolutely unable to do that. And the consumer repair person that I talked to you guys mentioned earlier, he actually has his clients to record conversations. And so imagine how helpful that is for me when I get a client where they've recorded a call and the debt collector is harassing them on the call. Normally, we don't even have to file a lawsuit on those, because when I send them the draft complaint and I also attach the audio, then they want to talk about, settling on that before we even go to court. So there are certain things, certain assertions they cannot make. They definitely can't tell you you're going to jail or things like that for not paying the debt. So just being aware of those things. Damages under the FDCPA are you're awarded up to $1,000 per violation. So any violation they make, you're awarded $1,000 per violation. And that can get those violations can be very extensive, where there might be one lawsuit where there are 6 violations. That's $6,000. And under the FDCPA, you also get actual costs. So my clients are not out of any money. They get their court costs back. They get attorney's fees. That is under the FDCPA. You get your attorney's fees awarded to you as well. So any costs that you've come out of upfront for filing the lawsuit, your attorney's fees, and your award for damages per violation. We talked about not making payment on debts. Like I said, I advise my clients, if you think there is a violation, do not make payments on the debt. Debt collectors have a certain number of years that they can sue you and collect on a debt. So that's called the statute of limitations. If that period has passed, then some states provide that if you make a payment, then you trigger the statute of limitations to start running again. So you want to definitely get some legal advice as to whether your obligation under this debt has expired. Because if it has, but you start making payments, now you've restarted that clock, and there's not much an attorney can do about it at that point. So I again advise, don't make payments until you get the debt validation, until you know that the statute of limitation has not expired before you start making any payment arrangements on the debt. Generally, the negative reporting stays on your report for 7 years, but there are some exceptions to that legally we can help you with as well. And there are situations where you can negotiate to settle the debt for a lower amount, where the debt collector will accept least amount, my terms here, than what you actually owe on it. And so if that's the case, if you're negotiating on your own a settlement for the debt, make sure that you get in writing that what you're paying settles the entire debt. Because I've seen many cases where a client, they were trying to settle and negotiate the case. The claim on their own, which is fine. I encourage knowledge, and doing things on your own if you can as well. But they did not get in writing that it settles the entire debt. So they paid this lump sum, and then the debt collector still came back later for the remaining balance on that. So you want to always make sure that you're getting those communications in writing. In my attorney settlement agreements, we don't do any settlement unless they also agree to delete the debt. So, for example, you might negotiate with the debt collector to pay $500 as opposed to the $800 that you owe, but then they're still reporting it on your report, and that's going to stay on there for possibly 7 years. In our settlements, we always get an agreement to delete that debt as well. So what that involves, they would send the deletion request to the credit reporting agency so that that trade line is completely removed from your consumer report. So an example of litigation under FDCPA, I have a client recently. I'm always careful because I don't want to give too much information with where my clients can be identified. But recently, she didn't receive notice that her debt would be sent to collections. So she got a Credit Karma alert. She sent this screenshot to me, and she's like, I don't know what this is. I haven't gotten any notice about this, but it popped up on my Credit Karma reporting. So I immediately called the debt collector. I sent over the authorization from my client, letting them know she's represented by counsel, with her signature that I'm her attorney. And so at this point, they have notice of legal counsel. They have notice of the cease and desist to my client and that they should communicate with me. Well, what do? They send a letter the next week to my client telling her she owes the money and all of that. So that's 2 violations under the FDCPA. Number one, they had the notice of legal representation and they're continuing to communicate with my client. Number two, she did not receive any notice that this account would be reported negatively on her report. So we're requesting right now, this week, I actually sent out a letter to them for debt validation, even though we already have those 2 violations. So we're already planning to go to litigation, but I want to wait and just get their debt validation to make sure they actually have the documentation to validate the debt. They have 30 days to respond to that. So those are the types of things that an attorney can help you with under the FDCPA, like seeing what those violations are, and preparing your complaint for litigation. And a lot of times, like I said, even though we just started this and we're already at 2 violations, and I'm probably guessing they might not even have the proper documentation to validate the debt.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot, Tiffany. I was thinking, so I borrowed $100 from my cousin a couple years ago. Every time I see him, he keeps asking me for it. Can I sue him for harassing me? I've told you I'm gonna give you money.
I don't think your cousin is a credit.
But we do have a question from Yvonne, and I really want to bring this up and have you address this question. She says, what should you do when supposedly a collections company contact you, but your credit report doesn't reflect any document collections, or perhaps you don't know what this is all about? What should you do?
You should always ask them to validate the debt, meaning they should send you the documentation as to what debt they're talking about. And I would want that in written form. So not just telling me over the phone. So immediately tell them you want them to validate the debt.
Awesome. Now, what about big things? I'm thinking like people who maybe they owe Internal Revenue Service or State Revenue Service. IRS can be horrendous on a person. So,
I will
any
tell you, out of all the people to tackle, the IRS and your student loans, those are going to be the hardest too.
those are going to be the hardest too.
Those are going to put up the hardest fight for sure. But yes, there's certain public information that will be included in your credit profile as well. But keep in mind that even that information has to be accurate and it has to be verified. So even though it is, sorry, I'm looking at the questions here. Even though it's the IRS, it still has to be accurate information. It can't be misleading. So you would go through the same process of making sure that debt is valid.
So one of the things that I see Marie has asked Tiffany, can they reapply it to your report after it's been removed and validated after it has been removed?
Can they reapply to your report after it has been removed and validated? Okay, so that's a little confusing because I don't know if you mean by validated that it is actually a valid debt. So if it is a valid debt, they can reapply it back to your credit. If it was not a valid debt and they remove it, and this does happen where they remove it and then a year later it pops up again, because again, debt collectors rely on you not being knowledgeable of your rights, so it might pop back up again. And then that would be a situation where you have a legal action for them putting it back on there. And that's why, again, I say it's important to always get in writing that from them that that this is invalid or whatever the status of that is. So if it pops back up on your report in a year, you have that.
So there's nothing like a double indemnity, like if it's been cleared off once, it coming back.
No.
Okay.
No, it changes all the time, so and one other thing I'll share really quickly, what third-party debt collectors do very often, they sell off the debt. So they have people that just buy debts, right? And they buy them in a package, a group, and so out of, if let's say they buy 1,000 debts, they might know they might only collect on half of those. But they just buy them because they can buy them at a reduced rate and then they try to get money back, right? Well, a lot of times when they're buying those debts, they are not getting the contract or signature, signature. They're not getting the billing statement. They're not getting anything that proves that it's your debt. So then they might call you and say, hey, Marlon, you owe this debt to from Capital One. And you're like, okay, well, show me, give me the debt validation. Well, they can't produce anything. Whether you owe it or not, you have no obligation to pay at that point if they cannot validate that debt. And that's the power of that law, because a lot of people get nervous because they're getting a call from a debt collector. No one wants that. So they try to make some kind of payment arrangement when really you shouldn't pay anything. Yeah, you shouldn't pay anything until you.
Now here's the thing. In that scenario, so you use Capital One as an example. Mm-hmm. So the debt collector has paid Capital One whatever that is, pennies on a dollar, cents on a dollar, whatever. Now, does that Capital One now should be removed because they sold the debt?
And see, that's another thing. So if a lot of times you will see that appear on your report in different ways, like TransUnion might be reporting it as a Capital One debt. Experian might be reporting it as Capital One and the third-party debt collector. So now that's inaccurate because it's one debt, but you're being deemed, you have two different trade lines for the same debt. So that's the importance of looking at all your reports and making sure they're being reported accurately.
Man, these questions are popping in, Tiffany. You have really sparked a lot of interest, and so thank you so much. And a lot of people throughout the thread have said, wow, you've been a blessing tonight. But April says, how do you handle collection agencies during the COVID-19? Is there any special,
There are a lot of special provisions right now during COVID-19 as far as if you're getting extensions for payments, that shouldn't show up on your reporting in a negative manner. So let's say, for example, your car loan is letting you pay your car note 3 months. They're giving you a 3-month grace.
Yeah,
it shouldn't show up on your credit report as 30 days late, 60 days late, So those are some things that we are seeing a lot now where it's being reported as a negative thing where it should not be. There are things applying to rent. There are a lot, yeah. So if there's a specific COVID-19 question, certainly reach out to me because there are a lot of different provisions right now for renters and just different mechanisms to protect consumers during this time.
So take that example that you just used. So you have the car loan people, and they said that you could defer, but it still shows up on your credit report as being late. So what is your recourse for something like that?
Well, your recourse initially is for them to correct the information and bring it up to date. So I don't have any litigation right now with COVID-19. So it'll be in all of us, actually, all attorneys are interested to see how hard they're going to ding these companies for these violations during the COVID-19 time. So it's definitely a violation as far as inaccurate information. What their cure will be, how prompt, what my guess would be how quickly they correct it might have some bearing on whether or not there's an actual legal, whether you get a lot of damages. Because if I were on the other side, a good attorney always thinks about, well, what would their argument be? It's COVID-19. We're in the middle of a national pandemic. We're trying to figure this out too. We noticed the mistake. We immediately corrected it. But it's just, we have so many accounts that we're trying to keep up with. So there's that balancing act of how we're all managing this pandemic right now. But I think if it was something that was persistent after we put them on notice and they still didn't make the change, then I would absolutely move forward to litigation on that.
That's awesome.
And I think maybe we'll close. Alice Martin had a question about federal or state agencies that are set up to assist people with the kind of violations we're talking about. I think what we're probably talking about is once it's gone beyond your efforts to remove it and there's these violations.
Yeah, so I think, that might be the next step before legal action, because really legally is probably the last, stop or your best last stop. But before you get to that, there are many agencies. There's the Federal Trade Commission. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is really helpful, and it has a lot of helpful information for consumers. So that might be a great resource for those watching to look at that website. As well, there is the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act. That's for identity theft. If you feel you've been a victim of identity theft. And I was actually just reading an article today where identity theft during COVID-19 has increased. So that's why it's also important for us to be checking our reports right now and making sure that there is no suspicious activity going on as well.
Wow.
One last question that kind of came to my mind is what about with landlords and rents and that type of thing? Is that part of the Fair Credit Reporting Act or the Collections Act? If they're, wrongful evictions, does any of that fall into this category?
Well, it depends on if it shows up on your consumer report. So once it shows up on your consumer report, then absolutely that triggers the FCRA.
Got it.
But there are some cases where you might be evicted from, an apartment complex and they never put it on your credit, which that's great for you. But, but if it does show up or they go through a third party debt collector, then it triggers those laws that we talked about.
Wow. So Tiffany, Constance says, Tiffany Hill, you are so gracious to come and share your wealth of knowledge with us. Blessings to you. And, so a lot of people, Mike Perry said, awesome. And, and so you can see a lot of people are here and just very blessed. How can people, you mentioned your email or website, what would you like for us to share, because I think people feel your heart and your passion.
Yes, and I get really excited. I know I said I had 20 minutes of content, but it's just so much. And I like letting people know you have rights. Don't let them call you and treat you any kind of way. Like, let's sue them. So
let's get them.
Yeah, let's get them. And a lot of times, I will also say this: there are a lot of 50% of the time that just getting a letter from an attorney, they totally change up
Wow.
their tone. And they're willing to negotiate. It's like,
Right.
yeah. So so definitely don't so I'll just end with this. Don't be afraid to reach out to me or anyone else, in the profession for help that's important to you. And if it means getting $40,000 removed off your trade line, if you get to a point where you're not making progress, definitely reach out to an attorney. And then also, as I mentioned, under these laws, your attorney's fees, all of those fees are reimbursed. So, don't be afraid of, can I even afford an attorney? There are attorneys that will take the case because they know under the law, they're getting their fees back. It's not even a question. If there's a violation, they will get their attorney's fees. So don't be afraid to reach out. And then finally, my final plea, because of course I'm a proud mom of 3 amazing boys, and remember to have these conversations. What you learn, share with your kids. My oldest is 13, and I just got him one of the kids' credit cards because I don't want his first experience with credit cards to be when he's in college and he gets excited because they want to offer him a credit card. Like, no, we're going to get your card. We're going to talk about credit right now. So when you get to college and they're telling you about a credit card, he's going to say, I've had a credit card since I was 13. And, so just making sure that I think a lot of times we learn the information, which is great, but we forget to pass it along and, make sure that it stays in our communities and with our children to pass on for generations. So thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you for being here tonight. It has been absolutely awesome. A wealth of great information. And I think we could put these 2 weeks together that we've had. We can package that and send it out and change people's lives with that. Awesome. And so we really appreciate you, Tiffany, taking the time out from those 3 amazing boys to spend, an hour with us talking about this and helping our audience.
Thank you.
And so we will post your email, Chris. We'll go ahead and do that, for those that want to connect and reach out. But as you can see, this has been another phenomenal show, and just seeing Tiffany's passion, that first story of her first client and how, for her, maybe the win was different, but you could see that, for him, that 40,000, when she said that there was silence on the phone. And this is real life. And so, for individuals like Tiffany and Tony and I, who are really committed to making a positive difference, it's priceless, when we can help somebody. And I think tonight, I'm looking at the chat box, so many people have commented. So we want to say thank you, Tiffany, for being here with us. And, we are just so grateful that you have shared, the information. So with that, I want to say, get ready. June is next week. And, wow, I mean, it's going to be amazing, the lineup that we have in June. And just think, we started April 2nd. And, we just continue just to grow. And again, if you want to share any topics that you'd like for us to cover, please send an email to info@therealmoneycoach.com. info@therealmoneycoach.com, because we want to hear from you. We are really doing our best to be relevant during these times. And, based on the feedback, and for those of you that have been joining us, every virtual town hall broadcast, we say thank you. And I think what Tiffany said about, not just keeping the information for yourself, but sitting down with your kids. Wow, what a phenomenal idea. I also have a 13-year-old, and, I never thought about, teaching my 13-year-old about credit, this early. So I want to say thank you. And that's where we learn from each other. We're growing. So again, on behalf of The Real Money Coach, we say thank you. We encourage you to pay it forward, share with your family, your friends, what you've learned, and really, let's be a blessing. We can, as you can see, Tiffany had a lot of passion for what she does, and it's really become her mission. And so I encourage each one of us to tap into our mission. What are you called to do? What are you here on this earth to do? And so on behalf of The Real Money Coach, we say thank you. Continue being your best. And remember, what you do today will dictate where you'll be tomorrow. And as Tiffany said, if you feel like you're being harassed, don't be intimidated. Just get the support. get the team, we might say, team Tiffany, right? But also, as she said, there's other individuals that, are just as passionate, and you're not alone. And so that's what we want to really encourage you. If you know a family member or friend, please, go to our YouTube channel. You can get this video and you can share it with them, because again, a lot of people are being taken advantage of because they don't know, and fear overtakes them. So stay blessed, and we'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. God bless you.